discussion. So I'm going to give the floor to you, Kwame, so you can introduce yourself.
Alrighty. So yeah, my name is Kwame Mcpherson. I'm a book coach. I'm a writer. I love writing. I love stories. I'm a storyteller. And basically, there's so much. There is a lot. If I should go through my bio, it'd be another book. There's quite a bit. And what I would say that I traveled quite a lot. I love traveling. I lived in Canada for a while. I'm living in Europe for a while. I'm heading back to the Caribbean. So I tend to get around. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Like I said, there's too much to more for me to go into. So much.
Nice. Thank you for that. And it's kind of cool that you've been like in a few geographic locations. Like you've been in Canada, so you have that Canadian experience. You have like the UK flavor and some of that island flavor all to bring to the pot and keep everything seasoned
Yeah.
and juicy. So like I'm really excited for this conversation because I think there's a
There
wealth.
you go.
So in your book, you talked about men are taught to be in control of everything but their emotions.
Yes,
Can you expand on that? Because I found that like a really, really interesting point, and I think it's super relevant.
correct. Yeah, yeah, without time actually, throughout time, men have been seen to be warriors, right? The men have been seen to be the leaders. Men have seen to be the strong one, and that's what we have grown up with virtually. Like I said, throughout history, throughout human nature, and throughout humankind history, that men have been taught to be strong and silent. You know what I mean? So if you were to look at the movies that you watch, the Hollywood movies, you see that type of message that it would always be coming through about men being the silent and strong type. So we were never taught to be vulnerable or to share our emotions. And coming from an African Caribbean perspective, we have a history, and even African American perspective, there's a history which compounds the societal stuff. You know what I mean? So we have that underlying societal issue already, but then there's a historical and traditional issue that we grew up with because of our history as a people, as African people, and African people in the diaspora. So the message has been throughout the generations, one of which it's always the woman who was always seen as the quote unquote weaker sex. Like I said, the man was always the stronger of the two, and so it was never in his place to express of being vulnerable or emotional. Whereas woman, it was always a woman's thing of from that era where women are the ones who are the weaker ones. So they're the ones. So women are the ones who always also kind of being the weak of the sex, which meant being able to express. Whereas men were seen to be the strong of the sex, which meant not being able to express or not needing to express because we were supposedly stronger. So that's where the definition came from, I guess, in regards to men and inability to talk, really,
Mm,
in the
that's
main.
that's really interesting. You talked about like just vulnerability and the lack of access of being vulnerable. And I feel like as we're growing now and becoming more enlightened as Black people, we're understanding the importance of expressing that vulnerability and expressing those emotions, just so that we can heal for ourselves and we don't have all that build up. And you talked about, as a culture
Absolutely.
as a whole, just some of the, I guess, intergenerational forms of trauma that's kind of been passed on to our identities and our beings, of what that has internalized, of like a unique silencing
Exactly.
what we're feeling and our emotions. And it's funny because I talk about this in another podcast about the strong Black woman or the
That's
strong
right.
woman and the sense of silencing as well. So it's great to get an understanding that that silence is not just from a woman's perspective too. Men also have been silenced with their emotions and their feelings through this invisible cloak of like what masculinity is or what it was, right? Is what does it look like for Black men seeking support or help? And what was your experience?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. Um, from an African diaspora perspective, because there's always a distinction in terms of Africa in terms of Africans, our brothers and sisters in the motherland and those in the diaspora, because of our experiences in the diaspora. One of the things, as you touched on, in regards to silence, and it's something I alluded to in my book, was the fact of the matter is that when we were enslaved, when we were shackled, when we were chained, when our hands were bound, and our necks were in neck braces, and our ankles were shackled, when we were being led to the enslavement fort, or when we were even taken into the fort itself, and where we had the families that were together, at one stage they would have been separated. So they
Mhm.
would have been torn apart. So you had the male, and the female, The male probably would have had children. The female would have gone with the children, and the male would have gone somewhere else. Now, at that time, for the man, it would have been to fight for his family. He would have been vulnerable. He would have been emotional. Actually, he would have been so emotional and distraught that he can't. But there's nothing that he can actually do because he's shackled, he's chained. So that's I think that at that point, it's still always protecting our vulnerability unconsciously, because it's in our DNA. We have this thing that we can't afford to be seen weak. Because at the time, we couldn't afford to be seen weak in front of the enslaver, because then that's a sign of weakness, right? That would have shown to the enslaver that they were winning. We had to be strong, so we had to keep our feelings, our emotions in check, even though they were tearing us apart to see how we never see our children again, we never see our partner again, right? So, so that in itself has has caused us to be where we are today in regards to, I believe, that silence. And I also think that in order for us to understand ourselves, and especially as African men and like African men in the diaspora in particular, is to go back to that, to find out, because everything has a source, everything has a root, and to go back and retrace the step as to why the experiences that we're facing today, why the things that we're doing today is based on what we have been through in the past. Some people may say, why it happened 400, 500 years ago, but that's irrelevant. That everything's connected, So what that particular experience of our ancestors has fed through to us to this day, and that's the reason why we're in the situation where we are, when we have our men in particular having the inability to open up or to express that vulnerability. Now, in order to support that, is having that understanding as to where it started. When we understand that, it's not because a man may be in a relationship and a woman may be with him and say, oh, he doesn't talk. It's more than that. It's deeper than that. So when we have an understanding of the full story, then we can approach it differently. So the woman may come from our perspective and say, you know what, you may need the help of another man in order to express, rather than me as a woman. You understand? So those simple things are ways in which a man can be supported in order for him to open up. And once we know that, then we can start to rebuild the relationship between ourselves as men, and relationship that we have with others.
Like once we start to touch on that root, it's like we're starting to come to like this sense of decolonialization of what it is to be Black spaces, dealing with mental health and like the forms of how colonialization has oppressed us,
Exactly.
and moving forward, almost having a system where we're decolonializing some of these ideals and the effects that have been there and what it's
Right.
caused on our own bodies. So it's just like that moving forward of healing, but also having that understanding of
Yeah.
that root cause that we need to heal, not bandage, but like we need to heal and grow from to work through whatever we're working through. So as a nice flow in, you touched upon in your book about systematic racism and just pushing Black people more, just how it's punished Black people more
Mhm.
strenuously than how it has impact and how it's had such a
Yeah.
great impact on like mental health. You want to like talk about that a little bit?
All right. Yeah. What's the thing is, again, what's interesting is that nothing has changed in regards to what may have happened 5 years ago, 50 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Nothing has really changed in regards to the outcomes of what we've been going through, especially in terms of the Mahapa, especially in terms of the African Holocaust. So you find from that point on, the generations that have lived from that point onwards, we haven't actually started to heal, like you said before. We haven't. I don't think that we began to heal yet. We haven't, because we haven't had the. And I've always said this. We had the incident with George Floyd last year when he talked about he couldn't breathe, right? But for me, if you take it away from, not taking away only from in terms of what George Floyd was going through, but if you took that to a global, macro, international perspective, as a people, we have not been able to breathe for over 500 years. We have not had the chance to stop and reflect and heal and come to terms and start to rebuild for that long. So the system that has been in place from that time until now still exists. We're still especially in the West, especially in the West. And when you talk about the West, you talk about the country and what they have created and how they continue to come from in terms of heritage. So it has. And I think it will take a lot for us to continue to educate ourselves, continue to talk, have forums, to find ways of supporting each other within that particular system, knowing that it exists, finding solutions to our own healing within that system. You know what I mean? We can't do about the system. The system's already there. It's having an understanding and wherewithal to combat the system, but within it to create something for ourselves. You know what I mean? So where we have that outlet, where we're able to talk, where we're able to convene, and where we're able to reason and to heal. Because we haven't done that, I don't think, for generation.
Yeah, and I actually like that point that you talk about and just like beginning to heal. And like personally, I would like to take a sledgehammer to the system and be like, listen,
You got all of that?
build it, So it would be good if we could like again having our own spaces and having um what it's going to be meaningful for us to just again going back to decolonializing a lot of these systems that are just like affecting our well-being as members in the Black community, and just like what that looks like, so just like ripping it through like layers to layers. So I agree with that. And just kind of like moving forward is, you touched upon personal development and what does that mean and look like,
Yeah,
especially within like this craziness of um, systematic racism and like this colonialized process that we have and how it affects our mental health. What does personal development look like for you?
oh wow. It looks like with one, I've written a book about my experience, right? So storytelling, which is our traditional form of relating and creating relationships, as well as empowering, enlightening, and teaching and learning. So I think storytelling, which especially in today's world where we have the technology to do so, needs to continue. So that is definitely one way of how we can actually begin to. And there's a practical matter of putting in place mechanisms that enable other brothers and sisters to have the space to tell their own story, not to feel ashamed about it, to feel that they're in a place of system and feel safe within a space to express, and a matter of bringing in the professional help from those who have that ability to enable those to be feel safe in a positive space to express, that's what it means about supporting each other. But it is important to have that space. It's important to have a space where we can confer and tell stories and cry and jump and laugh and I mean within the system that we do live. You know what I mean? So, and that will give the power and empower us to move forward and to heal, even though we're in the system. So that's what I would say in regards to personal development. Story, telling stories. Continue to talk about our stories.
I think that's so important. And I think, if you look at like traditional medical models of like just therapy and like mental health area, um, you know, they always say people have to be group ready before they can be in groups. But I feel like when you're dealing with like Black population, it's the opposite, because we are a communal people. We have strived on collective. We are used to like having those stories and that shared experiences. So even in the
Yeah,
process of
totally.
decolonizing that is having that
Exactly.
where we are always in a group, like, and then going one to one, not like
That's
going
right.
to one and then going to being prepared to be in a group when naturally that is who we are
That's
and
right.
relate best. And that's
That's
what
right. That's right.
you know. Um, so I think that that is important, is that aspect of storytelling within groups, so people are hearing our stories, hearing it from like other people's.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's such an amazing. I'm glad you really brought that up, because
Yeah.
it needed to be brought up. It needed to be like something that is out there in the
Yeah.
open to say like these are ways that we've identified work.
Yeah, because you see, because because the European concept, the European concept is always about self. I mean, the European way of teaching has never it's not about having others or having a community. A Eurocentric thinking is always about self. You know what I mean? Whereas an African centered thinking is about the whole, family, the community, nation. So any healing that needs to take place can't be a one on one. It has to be within a confines of a space of a place where people feel safe and they can do so. You know what I mean? So that's what I think we can do in order to develop and to help with the movement and healing of people in that regard.
Yeah, that is so deep. Like you're absolutely right. It's just like combating that Western European lens of like the self and understanding. No, it's different. It's a collective now. It's supporting that piece of collectivism. What
Yeah,
we've agreed.
exactly.
Um, I was actually on another forum yesterday, and we had one lady from Cameroon who's like, she brought up an article about Rwanda, and when all these Western social workers came,
Right,
they rejected the notion of these people want to be out in the open, in the sun for
right.
healing. They wanted to be in community where drumming and dancing was a part of their healing, and just touching back on those traditional aspects of what it is for healing, and not necessarily
Exactly.
individual self perspective. Because like honestly, I feel like sometimes when you focus on that individual, you create so much chaos and so much internal stuff. And I feel like as Black people collectively, especially through colonialization, we need a space where we can heal collectively and combat
Definitely.
that like intergenerational forms of trauma. So actually, with that being said,
Yep.
I'm gonna go into the next question. You talked about
Totally. Totally.
yeah. We talked about intergenerational trauma and how it's affect Black men and women. You refer to it as MAFA.
Right.
Okay. Like when I seen this word, I was like, MAFA. I'm gonna let you elaborate on that. Like, what is MAFA? I know it's an African word, but
Mahafa. Yeah, Mahafa means Holocaust. It's Swahili for Holocaust. So basically, what we went through as an African people is African Holocaust. And Mahafa is that journey, that whole episode that interrupted our humanity. That's basically what it means.
mm,
It's Mahafa.
their humanity. I like that. And I think having a word that can signify this is interrupting our humanity of what we were as people before and
Yeah.
what we are today. That is so powerful in itself. How
Yeah.
did you find that word? Like, how did you come across that?
It's funny, I came across that word because there's another brother here. I don't know if you remember, years ago in the UK, there was a celebration of the abolition of slavery that took place down by Westminster Abbey, right? So basically, it was Europeans, English people giving themselves a pat on the back in regards to abolition of slavery. At the time, there was a brother by the name of Toyin Abegto. I don't know if you remember that. If you look it up, Google it, you'll see there's a video on YouTube of him in the Westminster Abbey, which is this is where the Queen and her elk, this is where they go and celebrate whatever. And he stood up in Westminster Abbey and said, "Not in my name." And I saw somebody who I know personally, and he was, and so and there were other brothers who were talking about the Mahafa, and I was trying to think what is, and then that's how I learned. So it's a word which is not used in terms of our struggle, but in terms of African Holocaust. That's easier to say, but that's exactly what it means. So it's been around for a while.
Great, thanks for even just giving some background knowledge into that word. And I don't want to give too much of your book away, so I'm gonna leave it at there so that people can kind of get the book because it's actually a really, really good read. It kind of like
Yeah.
lets you walk through what like lived experiences are. It's like identifying some of your struggles and like just like I liked how you um
Thank you.
mapped it out as like a roadmap and a journey, and like you kind of see
Yeah.
that as you progress. And you also give people activities, like you give them prompts to kind of help them heal in whatever space they are in.
That's
Like you
right.
talk about that, like what made you include that in your book?
That's right. That's correct. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've done a bit of personal development, like you said, quite a bit in terms of motivational. What I mean, I've worked with Les Brown, for example. I work with T. Harv Eker. So I work with some of the big guys in terms of the motivational world. And when I was putting my book together, I just didn't want it to be a storybook in that regard. I wanted it to be more than just that. I wanted it to be something that provoked thought and helped someone wherever they may be in their own journey. Wherever they're in life. So that's that. So when I was writing it, I said, you know what? I want this to be more than just a book which talks about my journey. I want it to be something that someone can go back to later on and lend it to a friend or whatever, and they can actually see where that person was. They can see where they were and how they've grown from it. So that was the whole idea around combining the two, having the story and the activity, so that on someone's own roadmap they can map their own way through their own experiences. So that was the whole idea behind it.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I'm glad that you
You
kind of
know.
added those in because it was thought provoking. So I definitely agree. I would recommend anyone to listen to get My Date with Depression by Kwame Mcpherson. Also, for anyone who's listening, is there any like tips or advice or like just words of wisdom you can kind of like give them?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say, life is a beautiful gift. We have all of us have this one journey that we're on in terms of being in this space, and sometimes we go through challenges, and it may seem the end of the world. It may seem like everything's on top of us, and we'll never get past it. But always believe and always dream and always think that there will be a better tomorrow, because our ancestors did. For example, for us as African people, they knew for us to be here today, our ancestors had to survive. They had to be thinking about us and for the future. So we now have to be, we're now here, so we need to be thinking about us in the future, So yeah, so just realize that better days will always come, and the space that we have now is a gift, and we should treat it as such.
All right.
That's what I would leave. That's what
Thank
I would leave.
you. Thank you. Thank you. And where can people find you? So like, yeah, if they want to get your book.
All right, that's right. You can find me on my social media footprint. So Facebook. All right, the book is available on Amazon and Lulu. So that's www.lulu.com. It's also available on Amazon. They can find me on Facebook, Arthur Kwame Mcpherson. And like I said, I'm a book coach, so I help people write their own stories. And I put that out there. They can find me on LinkedIn as Kwame Mcpherson, and those are the main areas, those are the main social media platforms that I'm on. But for sure, and that's what I do. I like to help other people tell their stories, and I help people publish their own books. So I do a bit of that too.
Nice. All right. So what I'll do is I'll link all your contact in the description below so people can like click on it and find you later if they want to connect more, just kind of see what you're doing or even get the book. All right. So with that, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity, Janet. I'm really, 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 really glad that you reached out.
No problem. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for coming on to the Therapy Addicts. We really appreciate having you. And I think it was really, really great. And you offered a lot of like bombs of wisdom. So thank you.